Good morning. This particular YouTube is about the 3 essential questions students should read and learn about on AQA GCSE English Language Paper 1 source. In other words, we have 3 important questions that we must always bear in mind when we are reading. Reading is a critical element of AQA GCSE English language. And a lot of students kind of see reading the source as a waste of time. And this is not true. It's absolutely essential that you read it well. Remember, over 15 minutes is allocated to reading the source. And that must be there for a reason. You can't just read a source once and expect to know all the answers and then going to the questions and working it out. So there are 3 questions that you need to look at. So what I'm going to do is literally show the paper and talk it through with the 3 questions that are going across this YouTube at the moment: the what, how, and why of the paper. So let's have a quick look here. So when you get a paper, you will have 2 elements to it. You'll get the insert, normally separate, and then you get the question paper. And this is the actual insert of a paper that was done in 2018. So it's quite a way back, but very relevant to what goes on. And if you notice, even the cover page is giving information to the students from the moment you're going into the exam. It says here 21st century prose fiction. It's written by a lady called Joanne Harris. And we get that this particular extract is from a collection of short stories published in 2004. So you've already on the cover page, if you've read it well, you're going to know that this was a reasonably modern piece of work done by Joanne Harris in 2004. So as we go further on and we now go to the source itself, the second element that is really important to read is what the examiners put in this box. And it says here, and it gives you some context, and this helps you also to get a feel of what this could be about. And the information in here, if you look at it in detail, is quite critical. Source A is taken from the beginning of a short story written by Joanne Harris. Mr. Fisher, a teacher of English for 40 years, works at St. Oswald's Grammar School for Boys. So we've been given some contextual background about the source. And as we now have done the cover page and this, we have an idea that this has got to be about a teacher who's been around for 40 years. And somebody who really thinks will think, well, what age can a teacher be? Well, I think the youngest a teacher can be is 21. More realistically, it's 23, 24. And then you add 40 years to that. So the person who we're talking about is going to be 60 years old. Now, it doesn't tell you that in the source, but that is logical, obviously, when you see something like that there. In a teacher of 40 years. So then we can go through the source. But when we go through the source, we know that this is the opening, the beginning of a short story. So you're not going to know the full story and what happens at the very end of the story. It is basically just the way a writer sets up. So we know that there's going to be some common denominators. So when we literally read, we should be reading knowing that the writer is setting the scene. In this case, Joanne Harris is setting the scene and the mood and the tone and everything else. So it's very important when we read that we read it carefully, go through it carefully, and look at the elements and think, right, I've done it once, maybe I have to go back again and have a look at things. And sometimes we can look at things at the back and at the start and connect them. So what are the questions that we need to ask? So the first question that we ask is very simple. It's a what question. And a what question is, what was that about? What was that about? And if you can just ask that question, what was it about? What was the focus? What is it about? And once you've done that, you need to start moving forward to the second question and thinking, well, if I know what it was about, what I also need to do, and this is really important, is how did Joanne Harris create this story and what it was about? How did she do that? In other words, it is the word and the question how is always going to mean that this writer will have used very much language techniques, structural features, emotional sort of interaction, relatability, etc., throughout the source. She wouldn't have used the same techniques. It's not just description, it is also about behaviors, it's also about emotions and everything else. And this is what happens when writers begin a story. They're building up the feeling and the atmosphere at the beginning. Now, whether it changes that way is entirely up to what the writer's thinking further on. Okay. And then, of course, the final question that we ask ourselves, and we must do this, and this is really critical, and students sometimes just go to the 2 levels and they need to go to 3. Why has Joanne Harris written and created a story like this? I mean, if you think about all of the things that go on in a story, it's very important to realize that people have a reason for writing. It's like the reason why artists paint pictures. It's a reason why, pop stars create their lyrics and music. They're trying to engage. It's not just entertainment. Sometimes what we get from a source is an understanding about society. And we have to have this in mind. All English is about society. You think about it. The question, how has the writer presented, is going to be thread across English language and literature. So this what, how, and why is relevant to poetry, and we get that. We get it in the anthology poetry, and in AQA, we say Power and Conflict. We'll get questions like compare how Simon Armitage in Remains creates the effects of war, and one other poem. So how is the big question. How does Shakespeare present the theme of ambition in Macbeth? It's always a how question. And if you learn it in English language, these skills can be cross-referenced straight away into your understanding of the source. And it gets progressively harder. We cannot just have an idea about something. You see, I see students when they write their answers to certain questions, and sometimes there's not enough detail and perception, but it's not backed up with evidence. It's backed up with an idea they've got, but then they try to look for evidence and it doesn't quite fit. So it's about how they approach that. And if they understand the source well, every little detail can have an implication. We get in the Mr. Fisher paper just one thing, that he believed that Tibbet was not particularly a smart sort of scholar. So he's already got doubts, and these little inputs show doubts in that maybe it's not going to be he's not going to do that well with his homework. But those little clues you have to find. You have to do it. You have to be a little bit like a lawyer trying to find evidence to build your case. And this is what's important. Look, reading is critical. It's allocated 15 minutes in the exam. So you get an exam at 1 hour 45. Why do you think there's an extra 15 minutes? It's for the reading. So use it, but start questioning what you've read. Have those 3 questions in your mind. And by doing that, you will suddenly use that formula for anything that you read in English again. You will use that formula. Anyway, at the end of this video, there's lots of clicks that you can go to my shop, you can go to my website and everything else, and you can also subscribe to this YouTube channel. So thank you very much, and I look forward to any comments that you have.